Hey guys, it's Thomas here with Technovision, and welcome back to another Minecraft modding tutorial video for 1.16.4. Now in this episode, we're going to be covering loot tables to add a custom block drop to our block. And in order to fit all of the information into this one video, I'm going to be splitting this up into 3 sections. And as you can see on screen, in the first section, we're going to be adding a custom loot table. So essentially block drops to our ruby block that we made in the previous episode. And this will change based on the enchantment on the pickaxe. Then in the second part, we are going to be overwriting the vanilla loot table for the coal ore block. And then in the third episode, we are going to be injecting some of our own entries into the existing loot table for the emerald ore block. So 3 examples of how you can use loot tables to add some interesting drops to your game. Alright, so to get started, we are actually going to create a directory to store our custom loot tables. So to do that, you want to go over to your package explorer over here and go open resources. Now, right now we have a package here, a directory called assets, and this obviously stores all of our assets for the game, but what we want to do is close this up, and we actually want to create a new folder in resources here. So right click resources, new, directory, and we're going to call this data. And just like you would expect, this data folder is going to hold all of the data JSONs for our game. So what you can do in this data folder is create a new directory. And you want to name this the name of your mod ID. So in my case, I have right here, tutorial. So I'm going to name mine tutorial. So as you can see, just like assets, we have our mod ID right after. There we go. So inside of our mod ID folder, we're going to right click, create a new directory, and we're going to name this loot tables. And you want this to be, it has to be specifically loot_tables with that underscore. There we go. And inside of loot tables, we want to right click, create a new directory, and we're going to call this directory blocks. All right, so this is, again, the reason we do this is because it follows the structure of the game's packages. But so now we have a data, your mod ID folder, loot tables, and then all of the loot tables regarding blocks, so custom block drops, are going to be inside of this blocks package here. Now I am going to show you the other packages inside of loot tables, just so that in the future you can add your loot tables to more advanced things to their respective directory. So the second directory we want to make inside of loot tables is going to be called chests. And we're not going to be using this in this episode, but you will be throwing your loot tables for all of the things that spawn inside of chests, whether that's like a dungeon chest or in a village, that will be going inside of here. Another directory inside of loot tables that we want to make is called entities. Again, we will not be using this inside of this tutorial, but any sort of loot table that has to do with the drops for an entity, like for example, the drops of a creeper or a pig, would go inside of this folder. And then finally, we have our last directory inside of loot tables, and that's called gameplay. And you're probably never going to be using this unless you are making a very advanced mod, but all the loot tables that have to do with things like trading, like piglin trading, fishing, all that sort of stuff would be going inside of this folder right here. Now to actually make your loot table, you want to come over to the blocks package here, because we are going to be making a loot table for our ruby block, and you want to right click, create a new file, and this is going to be a JSON file, and it's going to be named the path of your specific block that you are making this loot table for. So for example, before I actually do this, in mod blocks, you can see that our ruby block, the path is named right here, ruby_block. So we would have to set our loot table's name to this. That way the game knows that this is what we're setting the loot table for. So again, go to your blocks here, blocks package, right click, new, file, and name it exactly what you put your block path. So mine is ruby_block, and then you want to add .json, of course, because this is a JSON file. Hit enter, add a repository. Alright, so we now have our JSON file. Now, loot tables are very complicated in how they actually are created and structured, and it does require a lot of knowledge of JSON, but I have a really helpful solution in the description. So if you head to the description of this video, you can actually find this website here, and I actually found this from my good friend Turdy Wordy, who also does tutorials on Minecraft and modding. And this is essentially a loot table generator, which will allow you to generate a Minecraft JSON loot table for a block or really anything without having to actually code in JSON, which is super helpful, especially if you don't know JSON that well, although it always helps. Now, first thing you want to do, make sure that the version up here is set to 1.16 because that is the version we are using for this tutorial. Another thing I should mention before we continue is that there are a load of presets here with this preset button. You can click any of these presets, like for example, if you wanted to find the redstone ore loot table, you could type redstone_ore, and there we go, you can see blocks, redstone ore, and if you click it, and not only does it give you the redstone ore JSON here on the right, but you can actually edit any of the values as necessary. So super helpful, and I definitely recommend playing around with that, but we are just gonna reload real quick. All right, so before we actually get started here with all of these values, I want to actually explain really quickly what loot tables are and how they are structured and how they work, because loot tables are really complicated when you don't understand exactly what these sort of entries are and what they're doing. So I'm gonna make a little crappy animation that you can look at right now, but essentially every loot table is a JSON file that has pools. Now, a pool is like essentially just a group of entries. There can be multiple pools in a loot table. There can most often just be one pool, but just know that there can be any amount of pools that you want. So inside of a pool, there are entries. And there's also a value called roles, and this essentially determines how many of these entries are randomly selected. So these entries can be all sorts of different stuff, all sorts of different drops, and a lot of different things that you can mess around with that I'll show you in a second. But you can add multiple of them. And inside of these entries, you can add functions and conditions. Now, these functions will carry out unique properties, and then the conditions will actually specify what conditions you need to meet for this entry to actually roll and to happen. I know that's really complicated, and I hope this sort of helps a little bit, but you'll see it in action in a second. But just know that there can be multiple pools, and in each of these pools can be multiple entries, and in each of these entries can be multiple functions and conditions. So yeah. All right, so now that we have that out of the way, first we want to select the type of our loot table. We are going to be making a block drop loot table, so we are going to click Minecraft block here. There we go, and you can see it set the type right there to Minecraft block. And you can add as many pools as you would like, but I'm going to be starting out with one pool. So you can see it auto-generated a pool for us here. So we have a pool, and we need to select the roles value. Now, the roles, like I mentioned earlier, is how many entries in the pool are going to be randomly selected. So if you have like 10 entries, for example, inside of this pool, and you have a role value of 2, that means out of those 10 entries, 2 will be randomly selected from this pool. They'll compete with each other to get selected when you break this block. To keep this simple, I'm just going to be setting this to 1 because I only want one thing to execute when, one entry to execute when I break the block. But you can mess around with this. You can even have a range, like a minimum and maximum, so it's random, or binomial if you want. But I'm going to be having exact 1, and it shows you right here some information. You can also have bonus roles, but I'm not going to be messing around with that. So we also have an entry here. It auto-generated an entry for us, and you can see here, so we have our pool right here, and inside of that pool is the entries array, and we have our first entry here, and this entry is just an item entry. So we can select with this entry an item that will drop when we break this block. So right now, what this is saying is that when this block is being broken, in our case it's the ruby block, it is going to drop a stone block. We don't want that, obviously, so I'm going to delete this. And you can type in whatever you want to drop when you break your block. I'm going to be setting this up kind of similar to an ore. So actually, when you break the ruby block, I want it to drop the ruby items. So to get one of your custom items in here, you're going to type your mod ID. So tutorial, colon, and then the name of your item or block. So in my case, ruby. And so what this is saying, it's going to give you an error, but that's because the generator doesn't know about our custom items. So just ignore that. But essentially, this is just going to, this loot table right now, super basic, but I believe it would work, is essentially just dropping a ruby item, one ruby item every time the block is broken. So yeah, and again, you could also have it drop like itself, like it could drop the ruby block, whatever you wanted. If you wanted to use a vanilla item, you could type Minecraft, because that is the mod ID of Minecraft, colon, and then the name of the block or item, or you could just select from this list here, and there's tons on there. So, but again, I want this to drop our ruby item, so tutorial colon ruby, and we can add a function or a condition. Condition would determine, you can see you can select some weird conditions here will determine what condition this entry needs to meet to run. We're not going to mess around with that just yet, but we will do that later. And then functions are just some interesting things that we can set for this entry. So one of the functions that we can set, for example, is the set count. So if we add a function here, again, to add a function to this entry, I just selected the functions button here. And there's a bunch of different functions here. If I delete this, you can see all the different functions. I'm going to be selecting set count, I believe, right here, set count. And this will set the amount of the item you specified, how much of it will drop. So if you set this to 1, for example, then 1 ruby will drop. If you set this to 5, then 5 ruby items will drop every time you break the block. You could also set it to range, which is what I'm gonna do. So I'm gonna set the minimum range to 1 and the maximum to 4. And what this means is that every time you break the ruby block with this loot table, there will be a random chance to get anywhere between 1 to 4 rubies. So you can have a range like that, or you could also have a binomial. So yeah, I'm gonna do that. So you're gonna get a chance between 1 to 4 rubies every time you break this block. And we can also set, again, a condition for this function. So even functions can have conditions. So I know it's very advanced, a lot of stuff going on here, but again, just to show you, you can select any condition you'd like here, but I don't want any conditions for right now. So I'm just going to leave this be. So there we go. Right now our loot table, it is functional, like I said, but we want a little bit more than this. So in order to actually have multiple functions rolling, but that don't conflict with one another, what we can do is we can actually get rid of this function here and this entry, and we can add a new entry, and we can set this to alternatives, and we can actually have children here, and we can select children entries. So what alternatives will do as an entry will allow you to have, this is like one entry, and when this is rolled by the pool, it will check any of these entries essentially. So this will allow us to do stuff like having silk touch like custom enchant effects, as well as like fortune and all sorts of stuff like that. So I'm going to be going with the entry alternatives. I just wanted to show you that previous example just so you kind of understand entries. And then inside of here, we're going to add a children. This is going to be item. Again, I want it to drop the tutorial, ruby. And we're going to add a function here. The count, I want to set it to a range between 1 and 4. And we're going to add another child to alternatives. So another child, because what I want to happen is I want silk touch to actually drop the block itself, not a ruby item. So what we can do here is set this to item again, because it is an item drop. We can set the drop to our mod ID tutorial : and then the block, so ruby _ block, because this is what I want to drop for this specific entry. And then we can select a function. We can select the count if we want. I believe 1 is default though, so we don't need to set any of these functions. Let's see if I want anything interesting in here. No, I don't need anything interesting in here, so we can just get rid of this function, but we do want a condition. So the reason we want a condition is because we want to check if the player has the silk touch enchantment. So we can select, I believe it is a match tool for a condition. And you can do all sorts of stuff here. You can check if the player is holding like granite. You can check if they've got like a potion effect. You can check item tags, all sorts of stuff, but I'm just going to be checking an enchantment. So I'm going to leave all of this blank, and I'm just going to select enchantments. And we want to check for silk touch. And we can check an exact level, or we can check like a minimum. I'm going to do range because I want just like a minimum. So I'm gonna leave max empty because there will be no max, but I wanna make sure that they have at least level 1 of silk touch for this. So, all right, hopefully this is making sense. So basically, if you see over here, it's editing our loot table here. So this pool is gonna roll the Minecraft alternative entry here, and if the player has the enchantment silk touch and it's at least level 1, then this loot table will make sure that the block drops itself, the ruby block. If the player does not have silk touch, then it will run this entry, which will give the player between 1 to 4 ruby items. So yeah, kind of hopefully making sense here. I know it's a lot to process, but you're just gonna have to mess around with it yourself. Some other things I want to add inside of our ruby item drop entry here is some additional functions. So let's see what we can add. Let's go to functions for this entry. So that would be right here. And let's see what other functions we can add here. We could add a apply bonus. Yeah, apply bonus here. This will allow us to set like a bonus amount that will drop when the player has a fortune enchant. Because, you know, these things, they don't work like naturally. Like, just because you have your block dropping rubies doesn't mean the fortune enchant will automatically affect that. So we need to add it ourselves. So we can do like apply bonus, for example, and we can select the enchantments. I think it's looting, or not looting. What is it called? Fortune. That's the one for mining. And we can select a formula here. You could select like an individual multiplier, but I'm going to just be following the ore drops formula. And there we go. So as you can see right here, when we mine our thing with fortune, it will apply a bonus. So that's very important. I want to make that distinct there. And then I guess another function we could add instead of our basic item drop here is what's another one that most ores have? Explosion decay is another one that most ores have. So this will make sure that it will change the drop amount if the thing explodes from like a TNT piece, for example, because as you know in Minecraft, if an ore is blown up with TNT, sometimes the ore will actually like be destroyed in that explosion. So yeah, that's what explosion decay will affect. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all that we need for right now. So as you can see, we have created a pretty advanced, I would say it's, you know, it's basic, but pretty advanced, medium level advanced loot table. And you can see it all right here. And just to run through it one more time, this time on the actual loot table itself, we have one pool, just a single pool with one role. So it's going to select one entry. And we actually have one parent entry called Minecraft Alternatives that has 2 children. The first child is a block drop for the ruby block. So this means that the ruby block will drop itself. And we're making sure that the player has Silk Touch for this with at least a level of 1. If that is not the case, then it will move on to this other entry here for Minecraft item, and this will drop the ruby item, our custom ruby item. And we've got a few functions here. First, the ruby item could be anything from 1 to 4 rubies, so that will be selected here. We also have a bonus being applied if the player has a fortune enchant. And we also have explosion decay. So as you can see, we've got all these sort of like sub functions and sub conditions inside of our entries, inside of our pool. So yeah, again, the only way that you're going to actually make sense of any of this is by trying it out yourself and making mistakes, and specifically checking out these presets. So once you are done with your loot table and you're all happy with it, you can actually come over here, copy your loot table, go back to IntelliJ, right click in your JSON here where your loot table should be, and you can paste it in. And just like that, we have our loot table. And thank God for this this generator. Otherwise, we would have to pretty much code all of this by hand, which would not be fun, I can promise you right now. So yeah, there you go. You've got your loot table all set in IntelliJ. All right, so we should be good to go and run the game now to test this out. So File, Save All, and we can run the game, and I will see you in a second. All right, so we're inside of the game now, and we've got our ruby blocks and some pickaxes. And if we throw this on the ground, if you remember in the last episode, we actually set the harvest level to the number 2, which means that we should only be able to harvest this with iron tools and above. So if we actually try this with an iron pickaxe, we should get between 1 to 4 rubies. And there we go, we got 3 this time. So it should be random, so if we try it one more time, we might get a different number. We might get the same, but there we go. That time we got 2 rubies, so it is working perfectly. And if we try it with a stone pickaxe, it should not be able to harvest because it is below the harvest level that we set in the blocks tutorial. So there we go. So we got nothing that time. Perfect. And then I also want to try this out with our Silk Touch pickaxe. So we got Silk Touch enchant on here, and it should drop the block itself. So there we go. Perfect. Just like how an ore works in the vanilla game. And also, of course, if you enchant one of these pickaxes with fortune, there will be a chance for extra rubies when you mine it, just like we set in the loot table. Alright, so that's the end of stage 1 of this tutorial episode. Now in the second stage, I'm going to be showing you how to completely override a vanilla loot table to add your own custom one. Now I do not recommend doing this if you are trying to make a mod that is going to work with other mods, because this will completely override even changes that other mods are making to vanilla loot tables. I can show you in the third phase of this episode how you can get around this, so I really don't recommend this method unless you really think that it's specific to your use case, but I'm going to show it anyway just so you have the tools available to you. So if you want to completely override a vanilla loot table, you want to come over to your data folder here. And as you can see, we have the mod ID folder for our mod ID, which is tutorial. Now, what you can do is you can actually create the directory to the vanilla game files using the vanilla game mod ID, which is Minecraft, and you can overwrite them from there. So we can actually right click on data, create a new directory, and we want to name this Minecraft because that is the mod ID of the vanilla game. And then just like we did here, we're going to create the same directory. So right click on Minecraft, create a new directory, and just name it loot_tables. And then inside of here, I'm going to only make the blocks one, but you're welcome to use the other ones if you are making loot tables for those things. I'm going to right click, create a new directory, and name this blocks. Great, so we now have the directory of the vanilla game loot tables for blocks. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to copy this Ruby block, the one we made, and I'm just going to just right click, copy, and I'm just going to paste it in here just so that I don't have to make another one, because I do want to keep this video somewhat short, and I'm going to rename this. We want this to override an existing vanilla block. So in my case, I guess we're going to do this for the coal ore block. So this would be coal_ore.json, and you hit OK, and add repository. Great, so we actually now have we are overriding the loot table for the coal ore block with our custom Ruby block JSON. So now our coal ore should drop rubies, 1 to 4 rubies, unless you have a silk touch pickaxe, in which case it'll drop a Ruby block. So yeah, and again, this will completely override any other changes that other mods or vanilla Minecraft are making to this loot table. So we can test this out by file, save all, and clicking the green triangle to run the game. Alright, so we're back inside of the game and we've got our coal ore blocks. So if we drop one down and we mine it with an iron pickaxe, there we go. As you can see, it has completely overridden the vanilla loot table for it. So now it just pretty much follows our custom loot table. Perfect. Alright, great. So that's the end of phase 2. So now we have created a custom loot table for our custom block. We've overridden a vanilla loot table, and now we are going to inject additional entries into an existing loot table without completely overriding it. So to do that, and again, this is going to allow you to actually change or add code to the loot table for a vanilla block without actually overriding the things that other mods are doing. So this is the preferred way of doing it. You can do this in another class if you would like, but I'm going to be doing it in our main class just because it's not that much code, but you want to make sure that everything you do eventually ends up in your onInitialize method here. So go to your main class essentially, and what I'm going to be doing for this phase is we are going to be editing, or I guess injecting additional code, additional entries into the loot table for the emerald ore block. So first I'm going to grab the emerald ore loot table, and to do that we can just create a private static final identifier, and I'm going to name this emerald_ore_loot_table_ID, and this is going to equal, oh, I spelled emerald wrong. This is going to equal just a simple identifier, so a new identifier. And to grab a loot table ID, you just want an identifier with the mod ID and then the actual path. So the mod ID in this case, since it's a vanilla loot table, would just be Minecraft. And the pathway would be blocks/emerald_ore. I keep misspelling emerald. There we go. So as you can see, we are grabbing the emerald or loot table ID by getting the identifier, getting a new identifier essentially with the namespace or mod ID, in this case Minecraft because it's vanilla, and then the pathway to the actual loot table. And you want to omit, so don't include the loot_tables here, just blocks and then the name of the block. And then I'm also going to grab, just really quick because we're going to do some stuff with it in a second, the pathway or the identifier for our custom Ruby block loot table. So again, we can just do private static final identifier. And I'm going to name this Ruby underscore block underscore loot underscore table underscore ID. And this is going to equal a new identifier. Oh, definitely not that. A new identifier. And this time the namespace is not going to be Minecraft because it's not vanilla. This is a custom block, or custom loot table rather. So this would be our mod ID. So we would just throw in mod ID. Again, accessing that string up here. And then for the path, it would be blocks slash, and then as you can see here, the pathway is blocks and then Ruby underscore block. So that's the path, blocks, and then Ruby underscore block. There we go, perfect. So now we have our Ruby block loot table. All right, now to use these, I'm going to make a new method right below the onInitialize method called modify loot tables, and we're just going to throw all of our code in there just so we can call it in onInitialize without any sort of like, messy code in the main function here. So I'm going to make a public, or no, I'm going to make it private rather, because no one needs to access this. So private void modify loot tables, There we go. And again, you can name this whatever you'd like. This is just my specific one. And I'm going to be throwing my code in here. So in order to actually inject additional entries into a loot table, we need to get the loot tables when they're being registered to the game. So to do that, we can actually get loot table, I believe it's not config, loot table loading callback, I think. Yeah, okay, loot table loading callback. Dot events, and then I believe it's dot register, and inside of this dot register we can well, first let's set the parameters. So resource manager, if you type resource manager and you hit tab, it should autofill all of them. There are a ton here. I think all we really need is resource manager, loot manager, we can call this ID for short. Let's call this supplier because we know what kind of supplier it is, and just setter. There we go. So this is going to open up into some braces here. There we go. And then inside of this this register method here, we are going to be running a bit of code. So we're essentially like adding our own stuff when the loot tables are being loaded in the game, pretty much. So what we want to do is check for the emerald loot table ID. So we can do that with if emerald or loot table ID dot equals, and then we can just grab the ID right here that we have. There we go. So if that's the case, because what this is going to do is it's going to go through all of the loot tables in the game. So we're first checking for the emerald or loot table, and then once we know that we have that specific loot table because it equals the ID that is currently in play here, then we can add our own code. So let's just write a little note here, checks for emerald or loot table. And then once we know that it's that one, again, you can customize this however you would like. What you want to do is create a pool in code. So just like we made a pool here in our generator, you can see our pool right there. We're going to do that in the code here. So to create a pool, you want to use the fabric loot pool builder. And I'm just going to call this pool builder for now. And this is going to equal a fabric loot pool builder dot builder. And then we're going to use a few methods inside of this builder to actually build our pool. So we're going to build the pool first, and then we're going to inject or insert or add, whatever you want to call it, into the existing loot table. So there's a few ways you can go about this. I'm going to show you two examples. Let's say for this example, let's say we want to add just a single individual item. So we just want to add one item to the loot table of emerald ore. So to do that, what we can do is first do dot roles, and we can just create the amount of roles to 1. So let's put inside of here constant loop constant loot table range dot create, and this will set the roles for our pool. So in my case 1. And again, just like in this generator here, we've got the roles here. So we're creating a pool, and then we're setting the roles to 1. So yeah, there you go. And I believe you could actually set this also as a range if you wanted. I believe you could use, instead of constant loot table, you could use, what is it called? I'm forgetting. Uniform loot table range, I believe. Yeah, dot create, dot between, that's what. And then you could set 2 floats, like 1.0f and then like 3.0f. So that would set a range between 1 to 3 rolls. But yeah, you can use that if you want. I'm gonna be doing a constant, so just 1 roll. And then I don't want a semicolon there. I want to keep going. So then we want to add an entry. So we can do that with dot width, and we can add an entry by just doing item entry dots and then builder with a lowercase dot builder. This is a method rather, and we can just add the item that we want to inject into this loot table. So I guess the item I want to use is items dots. Let's do like a gold nugget. There we go, gold nugget. And again, if you wanted to add your custom item, you could do mod items dot and grab your custom item. But yeah, I'm gonna add a gold nugget to this, and make sure you import item entry. And let's see, what else can we do here? Let's set the amount. So we could set the amount with a function. So again, all the stuff that we're doing here is exactly what we're doing in this loot table generator. We're just doing it with code instead of JSON. So another thing we could do is a function. So we could do with function, for example, and we could throw in a function like let's set the count. So set count loot function. There's a bunch of different ones that you can look at yourself if you want. Dot builder, and let's throw in, this is going to set the count, the amount of gold nuggets that are going to drop. We could set this from anywhere between well, dot builder rather. So inside the builder, we need to set a uniform loot table range between, and we can set, let's do same as the main loot table, 1.0f. The main, by main I mean the Ruby block loot table rather, 1.0f and 4.0f. And then we also have to dot build this builder. So there we go. Yeah, kind of annoying, but as you can see, we've pretty much just built a pool pretty much. So it's got a roll of 1. It's just got 1 item, 1 drop, which is gold nuggets, and it will drop a count amount, a range between 1 to 4. So it'll drop between 1 to 4 gold nuggets. And yeah, we can just build this and add it with supplier dots with pool, and then we can add our pool. So pool builder, that's this thing right here that we just created. And then of course this is, we don't want the fabric loot pool builder, we want just the loot pool. So we got to do dot build in order to actually make sure we build it into a pool. And yeah, there we go. So that is a pool, and we have successfully added it right here to the emerald ore loot table. And you could do this for any sort of loot table that you want. Now you could add additional dot width methods here, but because they would be entries inside of the same pool, it would actually compete with each other. Now you could get around this by using an alternative entry like we did here. That, where is it? Minecraft alternative entry here with children, but I'm just gonna make a second pool and inject it like that. So just for our second example here, I'm gonna try adding an entirely new loot table into the existing loot table. So it'll combine them together. So what's a little note here I can set? Inject or add custom loot table. So again, this will not override it like the last example I showed you. Not this example, like the one we did here. So this one overrides the block. Again, this will not overwrite it. This will add it on top of existing material. So again, we can grab that pool builder again. And this time our pool, we're gonna do some interesting stuff with it. We're gonna set the roles to, just like last time, just 1. So constant loot table range dot create, and we can just set this to 1. There we go. Oh, we also need to name this something else because we've already used pool builder. So let's do pool builder 2, I guess. Don't want a semicolon. Keep doing that. So we've set the roles to 1. Now we can just add our loot table. So dot width, and you can see in our last example here, we added just with dot width, just an item entry. This time we are going to add a loot table entry. So we're injecting an entire loot table. So loot table entry, dots, builder, and then I believe we just throw into that builder the loot table. So let's import loot table entry. And we can throw in our Ruby block loot table ID, copy it. We got it from the identifier here and paste it in. And there we go. I think that's pretty much it. So this second pool builder is, again, just as a roll of one, but instead of adding an item entry with just one item and a function, this time we are actually adding our entire, all the code inside of the Ruby block loot table. So yeah, that's pretty much, oh, well, we got to do one more thing before we're done. We need to add it to the supplier. So supplier.withPool. Remember, this is very important. You have to actually add it to the loot table. So we're going to add the pool builder tool too, because that's the one we've been building right here. .build. There we go. So I know this is a lot. Very sorry, I know, but hopefully you now know how to actually not just override, but add into existing vanilla loot tables, because this was highly requested. So now that we've done that, we can file, save all, and we just need to throw it in the onInitialize. So make sure you always run all this code in the onInitialize. Let's just throw modify loot tables in there. So again, that's the name of our function here. So we're grabbing our identifiers, using them inside of this custom private function, and then we're just calling it in our onInitialize method in the main class. Cool, so now we can run the game and test this out. All right, so we're inside of the game again, and we've got our emerald ore this time. And again, it should not get rid of the existing loot table. It should add on top of it. So our sheep is checking us out here. If we actually mine this block here, there we go. So we can see that we added both pools here. So first, it's using the existing loot table of just the regular emerald loot table. And then we also added those gold nuggets, that pool of gold nuggets. And then finally, we also injected our ruby block loot table in there. So we've got essentially 3 loot tables merged into one, or essentially 3 pools in one loot table. And yeah, so, and again, because we use 2 pools instead of 1 for the gold nuggets and the ruby stuff, they aren't competing, so they both run separately. But if we put them in the same pool, they would actually compete with each other, and sometimes you might get gold nuggets, and other times you might get rubies. So keep that in mind when you're designing them. And again, if we use silk touch here, we can see we actually get that gold nugget one is running like normal because we didn't set any silk touch stuff with that, but we get the emerald block, and we also get this block as well. All of these things working perfectly, just like we set in the code in the main class. All right, so that's gonna do it for this episode. Thanks guys so much for watching. I know it is a ton of information, and I know this was a really long video, but I wanted to show all of the possible ways that you can use loot tables. That way you wouldn't have to wait for other videos, so it's all in one place. But again, definitely make sure you check out this builder, mess around with it, make mistakes, get errors in your code, do whatever you have to do to fully understand this, because once you do, I promise it'll be so much easier to modify stuff and make really awesome advanced loot tables. And of course, definitely make sure you check out this sort of cool system we can use to modify existing loot tables. I didn't show you everything, but there are a ton of different methods you can mess around with here, adding different entries, functions, conditions. So definitely check all this out, and I will also leave a bunch of links and tutorials, additional stuff, additional help for all of this in the description. So thanks guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next episode.